Welcome to the Strong, Single and Human podcast, a real look at single parenting, how to navigate the ups and downs of life with kids on your own while keeping sane. We cover all manner of subjects from domestic violence, dealing with childhood trauma, through to fussy eaters and how to help your kids become resilient. I'm your host, Claire Martin. Welcome. This week's guest has been writing stories since she was little, growing up in New South Wales. She's an author of over 25 kids' books, including best-selling picture book series Human-Kind and Errol. She has been long-listed for CBCA Awards and shortlisted for the Australian Book Design Awards. Her book, Persistence, was highly commended in the Australian Education Publishing Awards, and Human-Kind book series was voted the best picture book series by Bookstagang. I hope I've pronounced that right. Her books are published in over 20 foreign territories. She also runs a picture book course online each year, and if that wasn't enough, teaches picture book and chapter books at the Australian Writers' Centre, offers private mentoring and travels to schools and festivals across Australia, helping creatives achieve their writing dreams. Welcome, Zanni. Louise, thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks, Claire. So lovely to be here.
No, that's cool. That's cool. Look, hey, tell us about your journey and how you came to write children's books.
Well, I guess I've always been a storyteller or writer of sorts. So when I was growing up in Inverell, which is in Western New South Wales, spent a lot of time just meandering our property, telling myself stories, had a whole bunch of characters who lived in my imagination, but were kind of so real I can still remember exactly who they were and what they look like and all of that. And was always typing stories for people and giving them to people. But I was sort of never aspired to be a writer and author. It wasn't a job I kind of thought about. Like I always wanted, I wanted to be the typical things like a lawyer or a police person or I don't know, teacher, something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when I had kids of my own, well, before I had kids, I studied art history, worked in an art gallery. So I was always in the creative arts sector, I guess. And then when I got pregnant, we moved up to northern New South Wales. And I knew I had to think a little bit outside the box in terms of getting a job, because I could have got an art gallery job maybe, but there wasn't sort of a lot around. So I was doing some writing educational type material for tertiary education. And, just was writing a lot, I guess. And that combined with reading a lot to kids and just spending a lot of time around kids' books definitely ignited my love again of storytelling, and suddenly going, oh, hang on, I'd really like to write a book myself. How do you do that? So I started to research, do courses, all of that sort of stuff.
Well, yeah, that was what I was going to say to you. Like how, like we all sit there, apparently, and I'm not sure, I should Google this. I'm not sure who's said it, but somebody out there in the ether, well known probably, said everyone has a book in them, right? Everyone has a book in them. It's just about whether you can actually be asked to sit down and write it, right? And children's book, to me, when I sit there, right, I look at children, and children's books seem so simple, but they're not, are they? They're like quite.
Yeah, it's
not nothing simple.
Just as writing a podcast, or I always think it does amaze me. I think that people think that, and I used to work in the art gallery too, where people would see some sort of stripes on a canvas and think, oh, I could do that, or my kid could do that. And when you work in the industry, like, yeah, no, it doesn't actually work like that. There's a lot that goes into it. And so just like that, a picture book is far more complex and there's a lot more to it. And if anyone's tried to get published, you'll definitely know, no, it's not that simple. Like there's firstly, most publishers aren't open for submission. And even if they are, they're taking hundreds of submissions a year. So for your story to kind of come out on top of the slush pile, like, it's a bit of luck and good timing, but it also has to be well crafted, and there is a lot involved. And so I always say to people, the first thing you need to do is to read a lot of picture books, and contemporary picture books, not the picture books you grew up with, because things date and things move along, culture moves fast. So you definitely need to know what's in the market right now this year, and you need to know what's out there, and you need to know what's selling. So, I did my research. I spent a lot of time in bookshops. I spent time in libraries. I did courses, and I had a blog. And because at that time, publishers were saying, yeah, have a blog. So I was just blogging about parenting stuff. And I got so into that, I almost lost sight of writing a book. I was just loving the blogging stuff, just sharing stories and having people read them and giving you their feedback at that very moment, and building a little community around it, and writing regularly. And so through that time, I made a connection with someone who turned out to be a children's book publisher. I didn't know it at the time. It just sort of happened later that she told me. And when she told me that, I thought, oh, that's exciting. I just stored it in the back of my mind, but she actually contacted me and said, would you, because I said on my blog, I'd like to write children's books. So she reached out to me and said, have you got anything? I'd like to read it because I like your style of writing and all of that. So, so that's kind of how it happened for me.
So, okay, which is great. Look, tell us, because I love some of your book series that you've got, right? So tell us a bit about your book series, because you've got Human-Kind, which is an awesome series of books that covers off various different things about humans, really.
It's about, being human. Yeah, that's exactly it. So I guess the question was, what makes us human? And the starting point for that series was all of those books which are about achievements, strong women, all that sort of wonderful wave of books that are happening in the last 5 or so years. On the back of those goodnight stories for rebel girls, like the wave of that enormous success where suddenly everyone was like, oh yeah, there's not enough stories about strong women. And that's true. So there was a rectification, but there were lots of books about achievement. And so I had a discussion with my publisher, and we were saying, but what happens before achievement? What is the process? What is the journey? And actually, is achievement everything? What about resilience? What about honesty? What about values? And because in schools, values are taught. And there was a time when values were taught in a more formal way. There's a lot of sort of more religious books, I suppose, teaching you values-based stuff, but it's a bit twee, and it's a bit like, oh, don't tell me how to be a good person. I don't think anyone wants to hear that. So that.
Well, but also that's life has moved on from the religious side of things, and like we have so many religious cultures out there. Me personally, I don't really believe in anything, but who knows, that may change, because people move and change, their views change and things like that, and things happen to them in their lives, which means that things change. But so I completely agree with you. I mean, like, a religious book for me would be a good story, but would turn me off from teaching me anything, basically, because I just go, good story.
I think the fact is most people don't like being taught anything through a book. Like, it's very rare that you sit down and go, I'd like to learn something, like how to be honest. I wouldn't do that, and I'm an adult, and the kids certainly won't do that. Like, they're very, very clear about the fact that, what the purpose of a book is, and they want entertainment and, joy and warmth and connection. So I did struggle at first to work out how I was going to do this in a way that sat comfortably with me. Coming from that point of view. And the way in was going into my girls' classroom. So they went to a very small school. So there was 35 kids in the whole school. So I sat down with the whole school and I asked them, what do you guys think about honesty? Why do you think honesty is important? And all of a sudden they just sat up and they wanted to tell me everything. And they had so many wonderful little anecdotes. And I totally changed my thinking about honesty based on that conversation, because I was sort of stuck stuck in this sort of not lying idea, but honesty is so much more than that. And the kids really, and really what they were saying was, I tell the truth because I don't like the feeling of when I tell a lie. And I feel,
wow.
and I don't like how it feels in my body. Like it makes me feel a bit sick and things like that. And I was not thinking like that. And so I suddenly understood how I needed to tell the stories. So I do tell that series of, so if a book is called Human-Kind Honesty, then there's 5 characters in every book. They're the same characters in every book, and they all have kind of a discussion about what it means to them. And all of those anecdotes are based on pretty much real life kids, things they've told me.
Wow. Okay. So that's great because you're getting a feedback from the kids and then putting it into a book so that you can teach other kids about what honesty means to other children, basically.
Exactly. And it's about connection, but it's also about a conversation starter, because I always ask the question, what does honesty mean to you? And I leave the kids with that question. And then I also have little interviews with real life adults, so librarians and teachers and different people different paramedics. And I ask them, what does honesty mean to you? And they tell the kids as well, there was once a time that this is why I chose to be honest. And then there's also at the very back, there are actual sort of more teaching resources, which are more for the parents and the teachers, I suppose, which is actually, it's written by a psychologist, a child psychologist. And she gives you really, really good kind of strategies and talking about the value in a bit more of a kind of useful way, I suppose, a bit more of a resource way rather than on my end of the book, which is much more about sort of engaging kids and connecting with kids and hoping to open up a conversation with kids and parents.
And I love the parent notes because, like, obviously I sit and I read to my son every night, well, nearly every night, apart from movie night, which we have on a Friday. So I do, and I get him to start, he's starting to read the books that we're reading as well. But the parent notes are really handy at the back because they just give tips and hints of how you can use the book to help your child, basically, which is great. And your books, like the Human-Kind books, are they geared towards any particular age?
Yeah,
as such?
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, most picture books are geared towards that 4 to 7 year old bracket. But, what you usually find is that they're being read to younger kids. And what I found really interesting was, I'm hearing from parents of younger kids, they really love them, but I'm also hearing from parents of much older kids. And even I heard, completely incidentally, met a psychologist at a school function, and we just somehow connected the dots that I'm the writer of those books that she uses in her practice.
Okay.
And she said, oh my gosh, I can't believe you wrote those because I use them for my 22-year-old clients, so she said they're useful for all ages, which I found really interesting. So the characters themselves are sort of early school age, but they hopefully appeal. They're deliberately written in a way that doesn't talk down to kids, but hopefully written in a way that will still connect with young kids. And, you can engage with a story on any level, I think.
And look, you have loads of books. Like if people go to your website, which is www.zannilouise.com, isn't it? Did I get that right? It is a .com, right. Isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. If they go there, I mean, there's loads of books there, and I love them. I love your little penguin character. I can't think of his name.
Errol.
What's his name? Errol. That's right.
Errol. Yeah.
Yeah. I love him. He's great. And but then you've also got Tiggy and the magic paintbrush. So is Tiggy geared towards like older children?
Yeah, kind of. So more like you call them early readers. So they would be early primary school. So they're designed for kids who are just starting to learn to read themselves. Yeah. So they're
like 6, 7, 8, 9 sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Probably, yeah, on the younger end. The stories, I mean, the character herself has just started school. So that's usually an indication of how old the book is for, because usually you read to your age.
Yeah, I haven't investigated the Tiggy and the magic paintbrush yet. The other ones I have, but the Tiggy ones I haven't. So
yeah. So the Tiggy ones are more stories. Like the Humankind is, I call them well-being books, whereas Tiggy books are actual stories. So they're narrative stories. And it is a series, but I still feel like a lot of those values are still in there. Like she's a very creative child. Every book is about her solving a problem. So she always starts with magic, and the magic always goes wrong, and she ends up having to solve it in a bit more of a resourceful way, sort of through being imaginative or kind or whatever the kind of thing is.
Yeah. And like writing books like Humankind and then writing more of the story books like Tiggy, do you approach them differently?
Very differently, yeah. So the Tiggy books, I mean, I approach every project I do very differently. I don't really have one set rule book for how I write things. So sometimes, it comes purely out of my imagination, like Errol, which is just for me, that just came out of my imagination almost fully formed. I got up and actually drew that story rather than wrote it, because it's not actually many words. It's more of a bit of a play, really. And yeah, so where with Tiggy, it took me many years to kind of formulate that. Like I had to I wrote many, many versions. I had the character, I think, more or less. And then I sort of wrote many, many versions of a story of her having something that solved a problem. It used to be a 3D printing machine, and then it changed over the years to a paintbrush. Yeah.
And do you and because Tiggy is more of a character thing, do you actually build and write Tiggy as a character, so what Tiggy would think about and what she looks like, and who, do you write like a character description about Tiggy?
That's kind of what I teach my students to do, because usually in a workshop setting, that's sort of a practical thing you can do with people. Whereas in real, what I actually do is not that. Like I do that somewhere in my subconscious or my imagination, but it's not actually a step I sit down and do unless I'm writing a much more of a longer fiction. So I've started to write novels. I've got my first novel coming out next year, and that one I probably spend a bit more time developing the character a bit more formally, because I guess you've just got a lot more depth that you're going to have to cover, and you need to know your characters a bit better.
Yeah. Whereas with okay, then that's fair enough, I suppose. Yeah, no, that's fine. And like you mentioned that you teach people to write books.
Yeah. So that's a big part of what I do. So I think there's not many kind of full-time authors in Australia who just write. I mean, there's probably a handful of very, best-selling authors who do, that's all they do. Most of us also do things like teach or do school visits. So I go into schools, I teach kids to write, but I also teach adults to write. So for many years, I've been teaching through the Australian Writers Centre, but I also run do a bit more of my own courses and things now, do some mentoring. So I help people individually, but I also have courses online, which I teach.
And you can get all of those from your website again, www.zannilouise.com.
Right.
No, that's cool. Okay, that's fair enough. That's fine. And like you mentioned that you go to schools and stuff like that and present in schools and things. Like, do you sit and actually read the story, or do you what do you like? Because you said you teach the kids to write as well.
Yeah, so it's a big part of what I do. So it's usually like multifaceted, and it depends on the age group of the kids and the number of kids you're going to have. So often I'll do a school presentation. So that will involve, half an hour of me, a little bit of reading, but actually more perform the book. So say with Errol, it is a bit more like a play. So I get a kid up on stage and we act it out. And then I also, I I ask them questions. So for me, it's always about engaging the kids. So I am always getting the kids thinking and engaging. And then I get them to come up with a story and I help them through the process. So I kind of teach them story structure and character development, but I do it in a fun way, which is sort of engages them. But then I also often will do breakout workshops where I'll sit with, say, 30 kids or one of the classes, and we'll spend an hour together actually developing their own stories. So they'll have their own little books and I'll teach them the process and they'll write something and I'll just encourage them through it. But I also do every fortnight, through a organisation called Storyboard, which is part of Byron Writers Festival. I teach a little writing class in the Lismore Library, which is really lovely because I have the same group of kids coming back year after year, and we've developed a beautiful relationship. And they do their own stories, but I give them activities and guide them through it. Yeah,
no, which I think is awesome because, like, I have to say, English was not my subject. I was more of a maths person. But I love reading and all of that stuff. So I don't think I'm ever going to produce a book unless somebody ghostwrites for me. But it's interesting because if you've got a child who loves doing that sort of thing and writing and sort of producing that, then it's great to actually encourage them by going to see somebody like yourself who has done it and has got books out there to help them to actually encourage them to actually pursue something that they love, which is brilliant. Have you had any surprises from the kids that you've actually dealt with, and sort of story wise? I mean, sorry, because I'm putting you on the spot now.
No. I think I always say I've met thousands of kids and I've workshopped with thousands of kids, and the surprise, I suppose, every time is that every single story is different. Every single story is wonderful. And I can't tell you how many wonderful ideas are out there. And they're usually the best ones from kids because they're a bit more fresh, like they're less hampered by their experiences. And their confidence. So they have confidence and they have joy. And that's where you need to be, I think, as an adult to create things. So for a kid, they're there. So the ideas are just fantastic.
And anything's possible, isn't it, with it when you're a kid?
Oh, yeah, they don't have, the limitations we have. So my job, I think, is just to give them some tools, but mainly to guide their confidence. And so the loveliest thing that comes out of it every single time, I've never done a workshop which isn't 100% satisfying, because I'll start and there'll be half the kids will be a bit ambivalent about writing and books, and by the end, pretty much 100% will love it, And it's really, for me, it's about giving them, helping them realize that it's about telling your own story in the way you want, rather than doing it for an exam or for a mark or something like that. It's about, because if you want to write a script for a YouTube, whatever, that's cool. And so I always give them that permission, and I always encourage them. And so, I'll have I had this really lovely situation once where there was a boy who, he'd never written anything before. He had no confidence, like you were saying, in writing. He was probably more of the maths boy. And he wrote this thing, and it just came out from nowhere. And it was, it was sort of in this real YouTube voice. And he probably thought, oh no, she's not going to like it because it's, it's like video games or something. And it was fantastic. And I just said to him, this is so original and just so brilliant. And thank you. And you just should have seen his face, and the teacher's face too. She came up to me later. She said, thank you so much for validating that kid, because sometimes it's the first time they ever see themselves in that way.
Yeah. Yes. No, exactly. And okay, so if we wanted to, I'm talking for all the listeners as well as myself, if we wanted to encourage our children to get creative and to explore at least writing stories, and my son's 6, going to be 7 soon, is there anything that we can do to get them to start to write like a paragraph or a story or generate a story? Are there any tips you can give us to sort of get them to do that?
For sure. Well, one of the best things I think is just regular, what we call free writing. So when I go to schools, I can tell immediately if a classroom does free writing or not, based on the confidence of the writers and also the quality of the writing. So there's every now and then there's a school which has a teacher who loves writing themselves or values it in some way. And they have the kids every Friday or maybe every day doing a 5 or 10 minute free writing, which is basically them with a empty journal. It doesn't have to be anything special. And they just get to write about whatever they want for 5 minutes. And it's all about just keeping their hand moving on the page. So, they might think, oh, no one will like this. This is not good. But that's not the point. No one has to read it. So I do think that's really important, to give a kid permission to write for no one other than themselves. And mostly what happens is they want to share it because they're actually quite proud of themselves. Go, oh, wow, I wrote a page. I think that's really important. One thing I often do is take the kids outside. So if it's a fine day, put a mat outside under a tree, because just shifting out away from the desk into a less formal environment just helps loosen up the creativity, validating them. So I don't give kids any negative feedback ever. I'm constructive, but more than anything, I validate them. And I always say, oh, I love the way you did this. I love this. Oh, this is so cool. Because that, I think, is the most important thing, is just giving them confidence, and the spelling and the grammar and all of that will come later.
So I agree. I agree. Because at 6, it's about telling them they're awesome and encouraging them to do things. And if they continue to do it, like you said, all of it comes later.
And if they're interested, and they will pick up that stuff through reading. So, obviously, like some kids are more interested in reading than others. And that's fine. We live in a house of books, but my girls mainly read graphic novels, and I think that's great. And so they're always reading graphic novels, but they are absorbing story, and they're absorbing grammar and spelling, actually, incidentally, through that anyway. So I think it's a lot about encouraging kids in their own direction. So if your kid's really into Star Wars or whatever, that's great. Let them go for that. Right? That's awesome.
Oscar's into bad guys at the moment. So we've got he's done really well. His reading's gone through the roof. He's got above grades in his school reports, which is great. So I've got him the box set, basically. And so we'll encourage him to read and do all of that stuff. So it's cool.
Follow their interests, And rather than because, I was quite academic. I love my A+ and all of that. But I have to be really careful not to put that on my kids, because that's not what it's about. It's about them finding their own thing,
Being happy and stuff like that. Exactly right. Exactly right. I think Oscar's more around the money side of things, which is why maths is in his butt pay. So look, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I know you're always famous author, right? You're a busy schedule, right? And I know you've got another meeting to go to. So one final question. If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Oh,
you've already got a superpower.
Oh, no, I was going to tell you my actual superpower is that I can fill up a jar every single time. When you have like a bag of nuts or something like that, and you have to put it into a jar. Every single time it fills a jar up to the top. Doesn't matter what the volume is, what the amount of, I don't know why. Every time
you can just gauge it.
Just automatically. It's weird.
Oh, that's annoying because I can't.
So there's no nuts on the desk. Anyway, but if I had to pick a superpower, I suppose, I don't know. I was trying to think what it would be, but I absolutely hate conflict. It's the word. Yeah. I'm frightened of it. I'm terrible at it. But I suppose it would be to be able to resolve any conflict just with so if it's world conflict or just interpersonal conflict, can't stand it. But if I could just go, it's gone.
Yeah, perfect. No, I agree. Yeah, well, especially in the world that we're living in today. I mean, that's just, it's horrendous. It's horrendous at the moment. Look, thank you so much for giving us half an hour of your time to come and join and come on board and talk to us about your books, about yourself, and then if anyone wants to encourage their children to write books, because I think anything that encourages kids to be creative and to get off the iPads and off TV is awesome.
Absolutely.
And I definitely will be using some of those hips and tips with Oscar, because I'm trying desperately to get him to write and do sentences and start to create stuff. So that's brilliant. Awesome. Look, thank you so much.
Thanks, Claire.
Have a great day. Have a great day.
Too.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast and you would like to hear more, please hit subscribe wherever you like to hear podcasts. If you would like to support us further, share this episode with your friends and family. And finally, drop us a review on iTunes, as I'd love to hear your thoughts, comments and ideas. It all helps me to understand and produce awesome content you want to hear just like this. If you want to check out our past episodes, write to us, appear on the podcast, or for links, resources and show notes, go to our website www.strongsingleandhuman.com. We are also on all the usual social media platforms, Insta, Facey and Twitter. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I hope to see you back here again soon. Be kind to yourself, and remember, no one is perfect. We're all just putting one foot in front of the other and doing our best. I'm Claire Martin, and you've been listening to the Strong, Single and Human podcast.